Have you ever felt like something is deeply wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on it? Like there's an invisible force, a silent web being spun around you, making you dismiss your real emotions, your thoughts, your doubts, and your decisions? What if it's not just intuition, but an emotional trap? A hidden script that manipulates your heart, your body, your mind, without leaving obvious traces. Disguised as love, empathy, concern, or other beautiful reasons, emotional manipulation wears subtle masks, but its impact is always the same. Guilt, doubt, confusion, exhaustion, abuse. You start to constantly question what is real and what might just be in your head, slowly disconnecting from yourself. The truth? There is manipulation happening, and it's so subtle it confuses you. And if you think it's not happening, be careful. Because the most dangerous thing about manipulation is that the one being manipulated usually believes they're in control and that nothing is wrong. Today, we're going to uncover what no one teaches: how to identify and neutralize emotional strategies that keep you trapped, and how to build sharp emotional intelligence that blends sensitivity with discernment. This isn't about becoming cold. It's about protecting yourself wisely and effectively. It's about real emotional freedom, protective freedom full of self-love. There are moments when your soul feels it before your mind can understand. A subtle discomfort in a look, a word, a silence. That feeling that something's just off, something often too small to name, but strong enough to unsettle you. That's the mark of emotional manipulation. It doesn't demand. It seeps through the cracks of your perception. And when you can't consciously grasp what's happening, you start to feel crazy for noticing things that aren't there, guilty for being suspicious when you shouldn't be. Because it's all manipulated and not obvious, the tendency is to think you're just too sensitive, too dramatic, when in truth, you're simply sensitive in the best way. The most effective manipulation hides within affection. It doesn't hurt. Directly, it drains. It drains your energy, your critical thinking, your mental clarity. It reduces intuition to noise. It distorts truth until it looks like kindness. The process of psychological control is quiet, but deep. It leads to self-doubt, constant confusion. The more you try to please the manipulator, the further you drift from your essence. You need to understand that if something feels wrong, it probably is. Acknowledging that is the first act of clarity. Denying that gut feeling gives manipulation room to grow. But listening to your inner voice, no matter how fragile it may seem, is an act of resistance. The next step is to understand how manipulation operates, what forms it takes, and why it's so hard to spot. Because yes, it is subtle. And precisely for that reason, it must be exposed to the light of awareness. The most dangerous kind of manipulation doesn't come with yelling. It comes gently, dressed as care and love. It uses sweet words, promises of love, logical arguments. But underneath, there's emotional calculation. Every move, every word from the manipulator is carefully placed to create doubt, guilt, or submission. What looks like concern becomes control. What sounds like advice turns into pressure. And before you know it, you can no longer tell what's real and what might be an overreaction. The cruelest part is that the victim starts to question herself constantly. Am I being ungrateful? Am I overreacting? The subtle manipulator doesn't tell you what to do. He builds a scenario where you have no choice but to do exactly what he wants. There's no visible violence, but there is internal wear. There is self-abandonment. And when the pain becomes too much and you finally push back, the manipulator always says the same thing. It was just a misunderstanding. That is mind control. Recognizing this kind of emotional manipulation requires deep self-awareness. You have to be willing to look at what hurts, even when it doesn't seem obvious, even when your pain doesn't feel big enough. Only then can you break the cycle and rebuild your boundaries. Because here's the truth. Manipulators don't act on impulse. They act with strategy, and they know you very well. Behind emotional manipulation, there rarely is someone confused. There's someone calculating. The manipulator isn't reacting, he's anticipating. He silently watches your weak spots, tests responses, measures reactions. He doesn't act from emotion, but from cold analysis. While you're feeling and opening your heart to the relationship, he's calculating. While you're seeking genuine connection, he's planning his next move based on your sincere emotions. This person knows exactly how to make you feel guilty. He knows the exact tone of voice that disarms you. He studies your loving language and turns it into a weapon of vulnerability. What looks like closeness is, in reality, emotional data collection, a cold construction of control. When something hurts, the manipulator acts offended. When confronted, he plays the victim. It's a game where empathy is just a tool for control, never real. The cruelest form of psychological control is the one disguised as love, because it confuses, wounds, and paralyzes. Understanding this is the start of healing, because the pain felt by the manipulated isn't only from what was done, it's from what was believed. And to break the cycle, you must accept that not everyone feels the way you do. Not every bond is safe. And the next step is to recognize how they keep you stuck without using chains. A manipulator doesn't need to be aggressive. All it takes is charm. Charm is the first chain. It shows up as care, special attention, exaggerated sensitivity. But little by little, sweetness becomes demand. Kindness turns into currency. What once felt like connection starts creating insecurity. You hesitate, measure your words, walk on eggshells. The fear of making a mistake shows up disguised as the desire to keep harmony. That fear of creating conflict becomes a quiet panic. Then comes guilt for causing any kind of displeasure to the manipulator. Guilt is a deeply effective form of emotional control. Emotional manipulation doesn't say do this. It says, you hurt me by not doing it. And your already fragile heart tries to fix things. This constant reparative effort drains you, exhausts you, and eventually erases you. Finally, fear. Fear of driving someone away, of disappointing them, of being abandoned. Fear becomes the foundation of the relationship, and everything starts being measured based on it. When fear is the measure, freedom disappears. Only adaptation remains. These forms of emotional manipulation work because they're normalized, confused with affection, care, intimacy. Often, this normalization comes from our own families. But affection that paralyzes is not love, it's domination. And the hardest part is seeing it in time. The next step is to look within. What part of you still allows this kind of emotional invasion? Manipulation isn't just about someone else's malice. It also finds footing in the wounds we still carry. Loneliness, fear of rejection, insecurity, all these vulnerabilities open invisible doors to manipulation. Not out of guilt, but out of history. Those of us who learn to adapt in order to be loved tend to abandon ourselves to maintain connections. And the manipulator senses this in our behavior and energy. And he doesn't respond with empathy, but with malice, strategy, and precision. From a young age, we were taught to associate love with effort. The silent adult, the affection denied as punishment, these leave marks. And in adulthood, those marks become patterns. And that's exactly what manipulation detects and triggers again. When you feel afraid to say no, it's because that child inside you, afraid of not being loved, is still alive. She's begging to be accepted at any cost. And that cost can be emotionally devastating. Recognizing this is the deepest act of self-knowledge. It's realizing that the pain didn't start today, and so it can't be solved just by walking away from the manipulator. Healing requires diving deep. It demands inner presence, without judgment, because it's in that space that real strength is born. That's where emotional resilience is built. Protecting yourself from manipulation doesn't require coldness. It requires commitment and loyalty to yourself. The first layer of that armor is self-observation. Observing emotional triggers, the moments when clarity is lost, when emotions become unbalanced, when patterns repeat. Recognizing when you're trying to please in order to avoid abandonment. Naming that behavior is the beginning of ending it, because what remains unconscious controls you. What becomes conscious sets you free. Next comes strategic detachment, the decision not to react to everything, not to constantly justify yourself, to let the other person sit with their discomfort. This isn't indifference. It's self-respect. It's understanding that you don't owe explanations to someone who doesn't honor your emotional boundaries. And above all, it's refusing to be predictable. Manipulators rely on your guilt, your rush to apologize, your anxiety to keep the peace, your usual patterns. Breaking that pattern is revolutionary. That's where a new kind of power is born, silent, internal, firm. The strength of someone who knows themselves and doesn't need to bow. But what if the manipulator is still around? What if they live in your house or are part of your inner circle? What if there's no way to escape them? That's when your ability to identify manipulation and your emotional armor becomes even more essential. Intimate manipulation is the most complex, and the next step is facing those bonds head-on. There are bonds that look like love, but are emotional prisons. Relationships where affection is conditional. It only exists when there's obedience, silence, conformity. Often, it's within the closest relationships, family, partners, long-time friends, that manipulation hides most perfectly. Affection blends with guilt, loyalty turns into submission, and in order to maintain the bond, you start to disappear a little more each day. It's not rare to hear, "I did that out of love." But love should never be a disguise for control. When someone uses your emotions against you, saying they're sad, hurt, or disappointed because you chose to prioritize yourself, that's not sensitivity. It's emotional blackmail. And sometimes it's done without conscious malice. But the impact is the same. Weakening, confusion, loss of identity, self-erasure, detachment from yourself. Breaking that cycle doesn't necessarily mean cutting off relationships. It means cutting off the pattern that sustains the imbalance. Relearning how to take a stand without guilt. Rebuilding personal boundaries. Understanding that not all love is healthy, and not every connection deserves to continue. For that, you need a new kind of perspective. Firm, loving, and strategically lucid. For a long time, being strategic was seen as something masculine. But emotional wisdom is actually a refined form of feminine strategy. Observing without rushing, sensing before reacting, choosing based on what's true, not what pleases others. It's intuitive intelligence that grows in silence and blooms in firm decisions. It doesn't harden, it strengthens. Understanding that what matters is not what people say, but how you feel. That not everything that seems kind is safe. That not every expression of love is real affection. This clarity allows us to create conscious relationships, connections rooted in truth, reciprocity, and mutual respect. A woman who develops this awareness stops being predictable. She no longer reshapes herself just to be accepted. She becomes whole, and that changes everything. This strategic vision doesn't come from cold logic, but from a soul that's fully present. It's about listening to intuition. And who has more intuition than a woman? So embrace that gift. Listening to your intuition allows you to say no with peace, to pause before explaining. And when this becomes natural, manipulation no longer finds a way in, because it always depends on your doubt. And when you're whole, there's no more doubt, only conscious choice. Now I'll share the ultimate secret to overcoming manipulation. Defending yourself doesn't require direct confrontation. Many times, silence is your shield. Silence as a statement, as a refusal to play the game. The absence of explanation, the decision not to justify yourself, these are acts of emotional power. Manipulators need your reaction. When that reaction doesn't come, their control falls apart. It's like pulling on a rope and realizing the other side isn't holding on anymore. Another powerful strategy is using ambiguity as an ally. Don't reveal everything. Don't rush. Guard your emotions as something sacred. This isn't about hiding, it's about protecting. It's knowing that not everyone deserves unlimited access to what you feel. Along with that comes emotional responsibility. Not carrying what isn't yours. Not fixing pain that doesn't belong to you. Not giving in just to keep appearances. True power is the kind that doesn't need to be flaunted. Real power is smart and silent. That's the kind of strength that sustains you. It doesn't need validation. It shows up in the unwavering gaze, in the decision that doesn't ask for applause. And once that strength is in place, one question inevitably arises. What's still holding you back? The final key to ending manipulation isn't about the other person. It's the fear of not being loved. The fear of being called selfish, cold, ungrateful. This is the most subtle and persistent tie. The fear of losing people when you choose yourself. But real freedom only begins when you're willing to not be understood, to not be approved of, and still stand tall. Because love that demands obedience isn't love, it's disguised control. Cutting these invisible strings is not an act of rage. It's an act of maturity. It's knowing that anyone who needs you to shrink in order to stay near isn't ready for your truce. And that's okay, because truth doesn't hurt, it liberates. The woman who understands this begins to fully inhabit her body. And with that, emotional games simply stop working. That's the moment when emotional freedom is born. Not the kind that's shouted, but the kind that's lived quietly. In the choice to stop pleasing out of fear, in the decision to be who you are, even if it unravels everything around you. Because manipulation only survives where there's emotional need. When that need ends, power is born. And that power doesn't impose. It simply is. You don't need to be accepted to be loved. You don't need to please to be worthy. Emotional manipulation dissolves when awareness awakens, when inner wisdom grows louder than the fear of rejection. And now you know. You've seen. You've felt. You can't pretend not to notice manipulation anymore, or that you don't know how to deal with it. From here, the choice is yours. Go back to what holds you back, or move forward toward the woman you were born to be. Maybe it still hurts. Maybe you'll realize some important bonds were built on fear, not real love. But that doesn't make you weak. It makes you lucid. A woman who sees herself clearly no longer needs to shrink to keep someone close. She doesn't turn cold. She becomes whole, to build relationships that are real. And it's this wholeness that dissolves manipulation. Not with shouting, not with war, but with presence and inner strength. With identity, with boundaries. Write in the comments, I choose emotional freedom. Tell us what moved you most in this video. Like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. And watch the video I left in the description. And end screen. It's the next step in your journey of spiritual growth and self-worth. Queen, you are part of a lineage of awakened women. And when one woman awakens, she awakens the world.